Welcome to our 2014 Alaska Vacation Slideshow. We left Springville on Saturday morning, July the 5th, and drove north to Grants Pass, Oregon. Grants Pass is guarded by a huge fiberglass statue of a caveman. The town has a long-standing relationship with the iconic statue, and the local high school sports teams are known as the Cavemen. My navigator pointed out the striking resemblance between the statue and the narrator of this slideshow. We ended day 2 with our traditional stop in Bellingham, Washington, just south of the Canadian border. Here, Ginny is working on her trip blog at our campsite outside of Quesnel, British Columbia. What would a trip through this area be without the requisite North to Alaska photo taken at the junction of the Yellowhead Highway and the Cassiar Highway? The Cassiar Highway heads north for quite a ways and ultimately terminates at the Alaska Highway near the town of Watson Lake in the Yukon Territory. What we have come to call roadside bears are prolific along the Cassiar. These are all black bears, even the brown ones. Signs such as this are not uncommon in the areas we traveled through. Most Walmart stores are camper-friendly and allow RVs to spend the night in their parking lot at no charge. This store in Whitehorse was inundated with trailers and motorhomes of all types. This motorcycle managed to find a small patch of grass in the parking lot where he was able to pitch his tent. The next few photos were taken along the scenic Glen Highway, northeast of Anchorage. A typical Forest Service campsite. This one was located about 15 miles from Seward on the southern shore of the Kenai Peninsula. Our good friend Tom Burge was also touring Alaska, and we met up with him on day 8 of our trip. The three of us took a half-day cruise out of Seward that focused on the wildlife in and around Resurrection Bay. Sea otters are fairly common and always a joy to watch. A wide variety of seabirds nest in the cliffs that surround part of Resurrection Bay. Both tufted puffins and horned puffins are found in abundance in this area. These are the horned variety. Seals, sunning themselves on the rocks. What you are seeing here is the defensive maneuver of one species of seabird. When a young eagle entered their space looking for a meal, the entire flock exploded into flight, thereby disorienting and frightening off the predator. It was quite a sight. These two whales were relatively close to the boat, and we were able to watch them for quite a while. Here are Tom and I at the stern. And here we are joined by the first mate. That evening, Ginny and I camped at a place called Clam Gulch on the northern shore of the peninsula between Kenai City and Homer. The campground was filled with locals who come here to dig for clams when the tide is out. An adolescent bald eagle near the beach. What the? This is the town of Homer and the famous Homer Spit, which extends out into Cook Inlet. We reunited with Tom in Homer for our long-planned bear viewing excursion to the area of Katmai National Park on the north side of Cook Inlet. Here are our guides, Craig and Sarah Elg, owners of Emerald Air Service. The flight from Homer to our destination at Kamishak Bay took just under 1.5 hours. This is Mount Augustine, a dormant volcano. We landed on a small lake several miles from the coast. Aside from the Elgs, Tom, Jenny, and myself, we were joined by a couple visiting from France. From the lake, it was a 2.5-mile hike to the coast. We walked on an existing bear trail. Our ultimate destination was a spot where the creek we had been following entered Kamishak Bay. Local bears gather at this location to fish for spawning salmon. Initially, we sat on a bluff overlooking the beach and watched the animals from a distance. Note how far out the tide is in this photo. After about an hour on the bluff, the group moved down to the beach. We remained seated and close to one another for the duration of our stay. The following are a series of random photos taken that afternoon. All of the animals in this sequence are brown bears, also known as grizzlies. As you can see, the animals were quite close, however they were more interested in the salmon than in us. This fellow is about to scratch himself by rubbing up against the cobbles that are protruding from the bank. As time went on, there were bears behind and on either side of us as well as in front. Here's Tom with a new friend. This one stared intently at our group for a few moments. It was a bit intimidating. Also, notice that the water is rising. A mother and her cubs appeared on the bluff. For safety's sake, the mom did not go all the way down to the beach. They seemed apprehensive about all of the other bears. These two began to snap and growl at each other, but no serious fighting occurred. A late lunch. We watched this large male catch 12 or 13 salmon in about an hour. Here, the two cubs are having their own lunch. Incidentally, the Elgs told us that as the tide continued to rise, there would be plenty of opportunity for the mom to obtain salmon without getting too close to the other bears. It was time to return to the plane. What a day, and what an incredible experience. The following morning, we explored the area around Homer for several hours and then headed toward Anchorage. Along the way, we encountered this moose. We also stopped to visit this Russian Orthodox church and cemetery. In Alaska, the state bird is said to be the mosquito. Here, Ginny is unintentionally donating a bit of her blood to the state bird. Signs like this are commonplace. The irony here is that right around the next corner, we saw this. Anchorage is the largest city in Alaska. We spotted a large colony of Dall sheep only a few miles outside of the city limits. The same thing happened in the same area when we were here in 2010. Pretty amazing. Yet another moose. This time it was a male. One of the goals of this trip was to drive the Dalton Highway up to Prudhoe Bay and the Arctic Ocean. The Dalton, also known as the Haul Road, was originally built in conjunction with the construction of the Alaska Pipeline, which runs 600 miles from the oil fields of Prudhoe Bay to the tanker terminal at Valdez in the south. The journey from Fairbanks, where the Dalton essentially begins, to Deadhorse, which is the end of the road, is about 400 miles, most of it unpaved. About a third of the way up, you cross the Arctic Circle, a prime photo opportunity for all who make the trip. Fuel availability is extremely limited on this road. Here we're gassing up at Coldfoot. As you might imagine, fuel on this road is also very expensive. Adigan Pass crosses the Brooks Range, and the top of the pass sits at 4,700 feet. The large trucks that utilize this road on a regular basis add to the danger of the pass as they crawl at very low speeds up one side and fly down the other side. Here we are near the summit. And these pictures were taken as we descended the north side of the pass. We camped 30 or 40 miles north of Adigan Pass. This area had more mosquitoes than either Ginny or I had ever encountered anywhere. Just opening the door to the truck or the camper would allow 25 or 30 mosquitoes to enter, and they were big. I counted well over 100 mosquitoes on my back in this photograph. Large trucks are the order of the day on the Dalton, and you must be very careful. We saw this little guy alongside of the road procuring a meal for himself. We finally arrived at the end of the road, Dead Horse Camp. To actually get to the Arctic Ocean, you must take a shuttle through the oil fields. Security is high here, and you need to make a reservation for the shuttle before you leave Fairbanks so that you can be checked out by Homeland Security. We had a 4 p.m. reservation. Here, we are waiting in the Arctic Ocean. We used this photo for our 2014 Christmas cards, hence the Santa hats. Some of the younger folks on our shuttle bus came prepared with bathing suits and fully submerged themselves. Believe me, even though it was July 18th, that water was cold. The Prudhoe Bay Dead Horse Complex is about as unattractive an area as you will ever come across. Purely a functional environment. We picked up some Cokes and a cup of coffee here before heading south. Note the rain-filled potholes. Every street in Dead Horse looked like this. It must help with traffic control as you can only drive about 3 or 4 miles per hour. There were many equipment yards like this because they can only drive on the tundra in the winter when it's frozen, so a lot of machinery just sits for part of the year. As we began heading south, we saw this herd of musk oxen in the distance. These are some very unique animals. Though hard to tell from this picture, as we began our ascent of Adigan Pass, it was actually snowing fairly hard. More moose. Once again, we gassed up in Coldfoot. Here is a nice shot of the Alaska Pipeline. Since all of the road construction and maintenance must be done during the short summer, you constantly encounter these guys. Met this guy at Yukon River Crossing, and his sign made us laugh. Obviously, beneath the mud, the truck was green. This was taken at our last campground on the Dalton. The white stuff is lichen, and it's the food that sustains large caribou herds in Alaska. A few miles south of Fairbanks is North Pole, and we felt compelled to get off the highway and take a few photos. This fellow lived in a pond behind one of our campsites. We watched him for quite a while and can honestly say he was busy as a beaver. Probably most people who are passing through the area pull into the town of Chicken. Here are a few pictures of the gold dredge that operated near the town. and here is a contemporary dredging operation. We next traveled to the town of Eagle. The town is located on the Yukon River, about 60 miles from the nearest major road. We talked with some locals who said that the town is isolated from October until April most years, and the people who live there must stockpile food and supplies in the summer and fall to be comfortable in the winter. The grass and sod serve as insulation for this roof. Later that same day, we saw the owner watering her roof. This sign on the way out of Eagle says it all. While traversing the top of the World Highway headed to Dawson City, we came upon this large Inukshuk. Originally, these human-like creations were used as trail markers by people of eastern Canada. The icon has become very popular, and now you see them all over the Arctic areas of North America. Dawson City is a colorful place that maintains the flavor of its gold boom past. Jenny took an identical picture of me on this same bench in 2010. Why do I look fatter in this photo? While resupplying once again at the Walmart in Whitehorse, we made a spur-of-the-moment decision to head south to Skagway, a place we had never been and one that sounded interesting. The road to Skagway was far more beautiful than these pictures show. Skagway was the jumping-off spot for the Klondike Gold Rush that began in 1896. Many potential miners arrived at Skagway by boat and headed for the gold fields of the Yukon in and around Dawson City. We spent the night at a Park Service campground in Dyea, near the beginning of the famed Chilkoot Trail, the arduous route that took miners to the gold fields. This was the Dyea Cemetery, and though many of the headstones were replicas, the cemetery was a reflection of the great adversities faced by the miners. On the road between Skagway and Dyea, we came across this eagle who was grooming himself. Note the puff of down just above his head. During the Klondike Gold Rush, the Canadian government would not let miners into the country unless they had 1 year's worth of supplies. At the Visitor Center in Skagway, this display demonstrated what a year's worth of supplies looks like. The miners were forced to make numerous trips to get all the supplies to the border. The Skagway Marina, dominated by one of the many cruise ships that stop here. Here are a few more pictures of the road leading to and from Skagway. On the Alaska Highway between Whitehorse and Watson Lake that day, we saw an inordinate amount of roadside bears. Watson Lake is the home of the world-famous Signpost Forest. Please note that Visalia, California is prominently represented. This little fox came out to greet us as we made our way back down the Cassiar Highway. Partway down the Cassiar, we headed west to the dual towns of Stewart, British Columbia and Hyder, Alaska. There is a great bear viewing platform at Hyder. However, bear viewing is dependent on the salmon run, and we were there a week or two early. So, no bears. This happened to us once before, and we were not surprised or daunted, as there is another option. We continued on up the road to Salmon Glacier, a spectacular sight. It was raining pretty hard, so we just camped on the side of this lightly trafficked road that leads to the glacier. The next photos were all taken of the glacier and the surrounding area. While this looks like a river, it is actually the glacier. As we passed back through the Hyder bear viewing area, we did see a few salmon. This is a pond at the viewing area. And this is just a street scene in Hyder. Back on the Cassiar. And yet another road bear. We next stopped to look at totem poles in two different areas. Late in the day, we stopped at Kitwanga, near the junction of the Cassiar and Yellowhead highways. We spent the evening at a very comfortable provincial campground. The next morning we went to Gatanmax, near Old Hazelton, where there is an impressive array of poles. On our way back to the Yellowhead, we spotted this billboard, which seems to accurately reflect the views of most of the locals. Mauricetown is a small village in British Columbia where the First Nations people fish for salmon using long-handled dip nets. As the salmon attempt to scale the waterfalls, the fishermen try to recover them from deep pools below the falls, or in some cases, snatch them out of the air as the fish are leaping. Success! Relaxing in camp that evening. We are now back in the States and taking our only ferry ride of this vacation to Port Townsend, Washington. We watched windsurfers and kiteboarders in Sequim, Washington for a few hours as we were looking around the area. Pretty cool. The next day, we decided to head east along the Columbia River on the Washington side. This is Bonneville Dam. On a self-guided tour, we saw these power-generating turbines. And this fish ladder, which provides a way around the dam for salmon to get upstream to spawn. Once again, we stopped for an hour or so to watch the windsurfers and kiteboarders. This part of the Columbia River is a mecca for people who participate in those sports. It was amazing to us how high these kiters get above the water. We crossed the Columbia at the Dalles and entered Oregon. Here's a combine at harvest time in northern Oregon. The last night of the trip was spent in the mountains near Sisters, Oregon. In the morning, we paid a visit to old friends Daryl and Arlene Nelson, who retired to Bend, Oregon. After that, it was a long drive back to Springville. Total mileage for the trip was 9,464 miles, and we were out for 29 days. I know this is pretty gross, but I just couldn't resist. We saw these two fishermen stocking up at a convenience store in Alaska, and I had my camera handy, and I just had to take the shot. Thanks for taking the time to watch our slideshow. We hope you enjoyed it.